My name is Heidi Rogers, and at 36, I'm wearing my Army service uniform. Not for a promotion ceremony, but in divorce court. I spent 7 years building a man and his company from nothing. I gave up a command position in Germany, worked grueling days at Fort Hood, and then drove rideshare until 2 a.m. And now his lawyer, Lawrence Harrington, is pointing at me and saying, "Your Honor, what does Captain Rogers know about risk? She's a salaried employee. Her husband, Corbin, is a genius. She was just a supportive wife." The pain hit when I saw Corbin nod in agreement with that insult. They thought I was just some gullible soldier. They thought they had erased me. But they don't know. They don't know about Austin 7 years ago. They don't know about the 49% business agreement tucked safely in my briefcase. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever sacrificed everything for someone, only to be treated like you never existed. This story is for you. 7 years before that courtroom, I was Captain Heidi Rogers, and I wasn't just in my world. I was my world. At 29, I was a logistics officer at Fort Hood, Texas. My world was the smell of diesel fumes in the pre-dawn light, the precise snap of a salute, and the complex, beautiful dance of moving millions of dollars of assets from point A to point B yesterday. I was finishing a massive joint logistics exercise. For 3 weeks, I'd barely slept, running operations that involved 3 different branches of the military. My brain was a matrix of call signs, supply chains, and contingency plans. On the final day, I stood on the hood of a Humvee, binoculars pressed to my eyes, watching the last C-17 cargo plane lift off exactly on schedule. It was perfect. Every piece of equipment, every soldier, every box of MREs, all accounted for, all delivered. An hour later, I was in the cool, quiet office of my commanding officer, Colonel Thompson. He was a mentor, a man who saw the Army not just as a job, but as a craft. "Flawless execution out there, Rogers," he said, not looking up from a file. "You seem to run on a different operating system than everyone else." I just stood at ease. "Thank you, sir." He closed the file and finally looked at me, a rare smile touching his eyes. "The review board agrees. The unofficial word came down this morning. Germany is waiting for you, Captain." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Sir?" "That command position in Landstuhl. It's yours. They want you there by the end of the quarter. This is the fast track, Heidi. You're the future of Army logistics." I walked out of that office feeling like I could levitate. I was on top of the world. A command position in Europe before 30? It was everything I had worked for. I got back to my quarters, my mind already racing with plans, and I did what I was supposed to do. I called my parents. "That's wonderful, honey," my mom said, her voice tinny over the speaker. "Germany, how exciting. Maybe you'll finally have some time to meet a nice man. You're not getting any younger, you know." I felt that familiar, dull ache. "Mom, it's a command position. It's a big deal." "Of course, dear," she said. "Just, we always hoped you'd find a nice, normal job. Something stable." I hung up, the shine of the moment slightly tarnished. They didn't get it. They never really did. My world didn't have room for normal. Not yet. A week later, my battle buddy, Captain Eva Martinez, kicked open the door to my office. "Rogers, you're coming with me this weekend. I'm not asking." "Eva, I'm buried in pre-deployment paperwork for Germany." "Germany can wait," she snorted, tossing a civilian shirt at me. "You need to see life outside this base. We're going to Austin. My cousin is at some weird tech meetup. It'll be a change of scenery." Weird was an understatement. The event was in a converted warehouse in East Austin, buzzing with energy I'd never felt before. It wasn't the disciplined, focused energy of Fort Hood. This was chaotic, loud, and everyone was talking. Men in expensive sneakers and hoodies, the tech bros Eva warned me about, were clustered together, speaking a language I didn't understand. Burn rates, scalability, disruption. I felt like I was in a foreign country. I was used to uniforms, to clear hierarchies, to people who did what they said they would do. This was different. And then I saw him. He wasn't like the other soldiers I knew. He wasn't like anyone I knew. He was standing in the center of a rapt crowd, charismatic, painting a picture with his hands. His name was Corbin Reynolds. Ava and I listened. He was talking about changing the world with his idea, Restock Solutions. It was a software platform to optimize last-mile inventory for small businesses. Most of it sounded like buzzwords, but then he started talking about the logistics of it. The why. And I froze. As a logistics expert, I heard it. Under all the Silicon Valley salesmanship, the core idea was genius. He had found a critical flaw in the modern supply chain. He saw me, saw the focus in my eyes. He broke from his group and walked right over. "You're not from around here," he said, smiling. "Captain Heidi Rogers," I said, shaking his hand. "Fort Hood." His eyes lit up. "A soldier. Wow, you must have a strategic mind. What did you think of the pitch?" And just like that, we were off. For an hour, we talked. I wasn't a tech bro, but I spoke logistics. I pointed out 3 bottlenecks he hadn't considered. He didn't get defensive, he got excited. He grabbed a napkin and started sketching out solutions with me. He was intoxicated by my strategic mind. I was intoxicated by his vision. The romance was fast, like a flash fire. We spent every weekend together. I'd make the drive from Fort Hood to his small Austin apartment. It was a whirlwind. 3 months into this, I was back on base when my phone rang. It was Corbin, and he sounded broken. "Heidi, it's over. I'm done. I've lost everything." My blood ran cold. I went into full-on crisis mode. "Corbin, what's wrong? Talk to me." "My laptop," he choked out. "The one with all my code, the entire source code, all the projections, 7 years of work, it just crashed. The hard drive is fried. It's all gone." I didn't hesitate. I didn't even think. It was a problem that needed a solution. "Where are you?" "At my apartment, but it doesn't matter. Stay put," I commanded. I hung up, checked my bank account. I had $3,000 in my personal savings, my just-in-case fund. I drove off base, straight to the Apple Store in Austin, and bought the highest-spec MacBook Pro they had. I found him sitting on his apartment floor, surrounded by takeout boxes, staring at a dead laptop. I put the new silver box in his lap. He looked at it, then at me, his eyes wide. "Heidi, I can't. This is too much. I can't pay you back." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Consider it my seed investment," I said. He looked at me with an intensity I'd never seen. He was crying. He pulled me into a desperate hug. "Heidi, I promise you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "When this takes off, it's not my company. It's our empire. I will never, ever forget this." I believed him. I believed every word. The official orders for Germany landed on my desk a month later. Thick, official manila envelope. U.S. Army orders, Oconus deployment. My dream, in my hands, my command. I drove to Austin that night, the orders on the passenger seat, vibrating with an excitement that was now mixed with a new, strange anxiety. I sat Corbin down on his couch. "They came," I said, handing him the envelope. He opened it, he read the words. "Landstuhl, Germany." He swallowed hard. And then he did the worst possible thing. He tried to be supportive. "Heidi." "Wow," he said, forcing a smile. That's incredible. I mean, it's Germany. I can't stand in your way. You've earned this." But his face just crumpled. He stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to me. His shoulders slumped. I could see his reflection in the dark glass. He looked devastated. "Corbin." He wiped his face, still not looking at me. I don't know what I'm going to do," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm just afraid. Without you here. Restock Solutions will just die. It'll just die." That sentence hit me harder than any physical blow. He wasn't giving me an ultimatum. He wasn't demanding I stay. He was just broken. He was telling me he couldn't do it without me. I stood at the ultimate crossroads. In one hand, I held the official orders. My name, my rank, my command. A symbol of everything I had ever been, everything I had earned through discipline and sweat, my entire past. In the other, I held this man. This brilliant, passionate, vulnerable man. A symbol of our empire, our future. I looked at the orders, then I looked at his reflection in the glass. I took a deep breath and made the decision I thought was honorable. I made the decision I thought was loyal. I walked over to him, put my arms around him, and said, "You won't have to." I was going to refuse the deployment. The fallout from refusing my deployment was immediate. The military, as an institution, does not like when its high-potential officers make illogical decisions. I was in Colonel Thompson's office 24 hours later. The disappointment on his face was worse than any yelling could have been. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the transfer refusal form on his desk, signed by me. "Rogers," he said, his voice quiet and heavy. "I don't know what you're thinking. I honestly don't. Sir, my personal circumstances have changed." "Your circumstances," he interrupted, cutting me off, "were that you were on the fast track to a full colonelcy, maybe even a star. And you just threw it away." He finally looked up, his eyes cold. "I don't know what's going on in your personal life, Captain, and frankly, I don't want to. But you just made yourself a non-entity." "Sir." "Dismissed, Rogers." My command in Germany was gone. The future I had built was gone. My peers, the officers I'd trained with, were packing their bags for important missions, for command positions in Germany, Korea, and the Middle East. I was reassigned to the base's records management office. It was a windowless room in the basement of the administration building, smelling of stale coffee and old paper. It was a career dead end. A place they put officers who were counting the days to retirement, or those, like me, who had been marked as a failure. My world, once filled with the roar of C-17s and the high-stakes strategy of logistics, was now reduced to the quiet, agonizing shush of paper. I spent 8 hours a day auditing personnel files from the 1990s, ensuring digital copies matched the paper originals. The silence was the worst part. It gave me too much time to think, too much time to wonder what my friends were doing in Landstuhl, what problems they were solving. My career wasn't just stalled, it was dead. I had killed it. I had traded the roar of an engine for the click of a staple remover, and I had done it for him. A month later, Corbin sat on the edge of our bed, running his hands through his hair. "Heidi, I've been thinking. We're in this together, right? For the long haul." "Of course," I said, wary. "Well," he said, forcing a casual tone, "we should make it official. You know, to stabilize things. My investors, well, potential investors, they like stability. A married founder looks more reliable." It wasn't a proposal. It was a business suggestion. There was no ring. There was no bended knee. There was just a practical reason to stabilize his image for investors. And like a fool, I said yes. I told myself it was practical. I told myself the romance didn't matter, that our empire was what mattered. Our wedding took place on a Tuesday afternoon at the Travis County Courthouse in downtown Austin. It was an ugly, sterile building. The ceremony was performed in a small beige-walled office by a justice of the peace who looked bored. The lighting was fluorescent and unforgiving. There was no time to buy a dress. There was no money for a dress. I wore my Army service uniform. The dark blue jacket, the sharply pressed pants. It was the one thing I owned that still felt like me. It was a symbol of my honor, my service, my rank. The only guest was Corbin's mother, Mia Reynolds. This was my first time meeting her. Corbin had always been vague, saying she was a lot. Mia was tall, thin, and dressed in a crisp white linen suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She radiated an aura of expensive perfume and casual disdain. She looked around the courthouse waiting area like she was afraid to touch anything. When I walked out of the clerk's office, ready for the ceremony, Mia looked me up and down. Her eyes lingered on my uniform, on the captain's bars on my shoulders, and her lips curled into a faint, dismissive smile. She leaned over to Corbin, loud enough for me to hear. "Son," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "I didn't think a uniform was appropriate for a wedding." She paused, then delivered the killing blow. "But then again, I suppose it suits your circumstances." A chill, sharper than any winter wind at Fort Hood, went straight down my spine. She was calling me poor. She was calling me low class. She was taking the one symbol of my identity and turning it into a mark of shame. I looked at Corbin, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say anything. He just gave a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Mom, come on, be nice, it's our wedding day." He patted my arm, as if I were a child who'd scraped her knee, and in that cold, fluorescent-lit hallway, I felt the second part of my life die. My career was dead, and now my identity was an insult. I had sacrificed everything for this man, and in his world, I was just a circumstance. The months that followed set the pattern for our lives. Corbin, now stabilized by his new wife, quit his day job. "I have to focus 100% on restock solutions, baby," he announced one night, as if it were a brilliant strategic move. "This is it. We're all in." He was all in. But I was the one paying for it. His savings, which were never very large, evaporated. My salary as a captain became our sole source of income. And it wasn't just our life, it was his business. My paycheck covered the rent on our one-bedroom apartment in Austin, a city that was getting more expensive by the day. It covered our car payments, it covered our groceries, and it covered Corbin. It paid for his laptop, it paid for the software subscriptions, it paid for his networking lunches, it paid for his endless cups of $7 artisan coffee, and, most painfully, it paid for his conference fees. "Heidi, I have to go to this tech summit in San Francisco," he'd say. "The connections are priceless." So I'd transfer another $500 I didn't have, while I sat in my basement office filing records, eating a sandwich I'd packed from home. Whenever I tried to bring up money to express the crushing weight of the pressure, he'd kiss my forehead, his eyes shining with that same old vision. "Heidi, we are investing. This isn't my company, remember? It's our empire. You're my co-founder. You're just the one who's funding it right now." And he'd use that word, our. That magic, manipulative word that made me feel guilty for even asking. I was sinking, and the one person who was supposed to be my partner was the one holding my head underwater. One night, after paying a massive bill for his web hosting service, I felt a wave of panic so strong I had to go outside. I sat on our tiny apartment balcony, the muggy Texas air sticking to my skin. I needed an anchor. I needed comfort. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I thought I could always count on. I called my mom. I tried to explain it. I didn't tell her about the money. I didn't tell her about Mia. I just focused on the sacrifice. "Mom, I'm struggling a little," I admitted, the words feeling like glass in my throat. I wanted to let you know, I didn't take the deployment to Germany. I'm staying in Texas, with Corbin." There was a pause. I waited, praying for, "Oh, Heidi, are you okay? What did you give up?" Instead, what I got was a bright, cheerful, relieved sound. "Oh, thank goodness," my mother exclaimed. "Cha, Heidi, maybe you've finally learned to settle down and be a wife. I was always so worried about that army streak of yours. This is wonderful news. Now you can have a real life." I didn't say anything. "Heidi, are you there, honey? Isn't that wonderful?" I pressed the end button. I sat in the dark, the phone heavy in my hand. I looked at the Austin skyline, and I felt a loneliness so profound, so absolute, it felt like I was suffocating. No one understood. My command thought I was a failure. My mother-in-law thought I was trash, and my own mother thought I had finally done something right by throwing my life away. The sacrifice wasn't just unappreciated, it was invisible. It was just me, all alone. And the crushing, terrifying realization settled in. With Corbin not working, the only thing keeping our empire from disappearing, The only thing keeping us from being homeless was my one single dwindling captain's salary. And it wasn't going to be enough. That absolute loneliness I felt on the balcony became my fuel. My captain's salary wasn't enough. Not for a life in Austin, and certainly not for funding a tech startup. The panic I felt that night solidified into a grim, cold, logistical plan. I'm a soldier. When a supply line is broken, you build a new one. When one isn't enough, you build 3. So began the next 7 years of my life. This wasn't a life. It was a schedule of exhaustion. My alarm went off at 5 a.m., not for a mission, but for my own mandatory PT. I would not lose my body, even as I was losing my mind. By 7 a.m., I was at my desk at Fort Hood. That windowless basement, that stale coffee. 9 hours of auditing personnel files, my brain. A brain that had managed multi-million-dollar logistics, numbed by the sheer, crushing pointlessness of it. I'd click, scan, and file from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. At 4:01 p.m., I was in my car, changing out of my uniform into civilian clothes at a gas station bathroom. At 5 p.m., I'd be home, standing in the kitchen. Dinner was a protein bar, swallowed in 3 bites. At 6 p.m., I was back in my car. I'd flip on the rideshare app. For the next 4 hours, I was Heidi, your friendly Austin driver. I'd navigate the traffic on I-35, pick up drunk college students from UT, and ferry tech bros to expensive dinners I was paying for. 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. At 10:30 p.m., I'd be back home. At 11 p.m., I'd open my personal laptop. This was job number 3. I'd found work as a freelance accountant for a couple of small businesses. My logistics background made me fast with numbers. I'd reconcile their accounts, process their payroll, and stare at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. 11 p.m. until 1 a.m., sometimes 2 a.m. I'd fall into bed, a dead weight, for 3 or 4 hours of black, dreamless sleep. Then the alarm would go off at 5 a.m., and it would start all over again. This wasn't for a month. This wasn't for a year. This was my life for 7 years. And where was Corbin? He was networking. He was building the vision. He was all in. He'd sleep until 10 a.m. He'd go to coffee meetings. He'd come home buzzing with ideas, telling me about the incredible people he'd met, the momentum he was building. He'd use my car. He'd use the money I deposited into our joint account to pay for his networking lunches. I was the engine, the fuel, and the road. He was just the driver, telling me where to go. One night, I made a mistake. I let myself hope. It was the anniversary of the night we met. I was so exhausted I could feel my bones aching, but I wanted to do something normal. I wanted to feel like a wife, not a bank. I left Fort Hood, skipped the rideshare shift, and went to the grocery store. I bought ingredients for chicken piccata, the first real meal I'd cooked in. I couldn't remember. I dredged the chicken in flour. I seared it. I made a sauce with lemon, butter, and capers. The apartment, for the first time, smelled like a home. Corbin had promised he'd be home. 8 p.m. I set the table. 9 p.m. came. The chicken was getting dry. I put it in the oven on low. 10 p.m. The sauce was starting to break. 11 p.m. I was just sitting at the table, staring at the 2 plates. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Corbin. "Sorry, babe. Got pinned down with important partners. This is huge. Don't wait up." I stood up, my back cracking. I walked into the cold kitchen, opened the oven, and pulled out the pan. I picked up a fork and ate a few bites of cold, rubbery chicken, standing over the sink. I felt so incredibly stupid. I washed the dishes, my heart feeling as cold and hard as the porcelain. I don't know why I did it. Maybe to punish myself. Maybe because the money from the freelance accounting was already spent. But I went back out. I got in my car. I turned on the rideshare app. I decided to take a few more rides, just to forget the ache in my chest. A heavy Texas rain started to fall, the kind that blurs the world into neon smears. I got a ping near 6th Street. 3 passengers. My car was clean. I was quiet. I was a good driver. That's all I was. The door pulled open, and three young men piled into my back seat, laughing, shaking off the rain, smelling of stale beer. The interior light flashed on, illuminating my face for just a second. One of them, the one directly behind me, went quiet. He stopped laughing. "Oh my God," he breathed. My blood turned to ice. I knew that voice. "Captain Rogers," he whispered, his voice full of a disbelief that cut me deeper than Mia's insults. Is that really you?" I froze. My hands locked onto the steering wheel at 10 and 2. I looked in the rearview mirror. It was Sergeant Miller. Not just any soldier, my Sergeant Miller. He had been my driver on that big exercise, the one that got me the Germany offer. He was sharp, motivated, and I had written him a stellar recommendation for officer candidate school. He was one of the best. And he was staring at the back of my head like he'd seen a ghost. The car fell into a horrible, dead silence. The only sound was the thwack, thwack, thwack of the windshield wipers. His two friends were looking back and forth, confused. "Miller," I said, my voice coming out strained and unfamiliar. "Good to see you. Where are you guys headed?" He told me their address, his voice flat with shock. The rest of the ride, 10 minutes, was the worst 10 minutes of my entire life. I could feel his eyes on me. I wasn't a captain. I wasn't a leader. I was just a tired woman in a Toyota Camry, driving drunk soldiers home for $12. As they got out, Miller paused, his hand on the door. He looked at me, and his eyes, they weren't angry. They weren't disappointed. They were full of pity. That was the worst. That was the absolute violation. He got out. I heard him whisper to his friends as they walked away, his voice carrying in the rain. That was my CO, he said, his voice thick with confusion. She was one of the best. Was. It's a terrible feeling, isn't it? Being pitied. If you've ever felt that gut-wrenching moment of being looked down on by someone who used to look up to you, hit that like button for Heidi. And comment below with one word for Sergeant Miller's face in that moment. Was it shock or pity? That was the moment something broke. A few weeks later was our honeymoon, or that's what Corbin called it. Restock Solutions had gotten a tiny seed funding check, and it paid for them to attend the SSW South by Southwest Tech Conference. Corbin was in his element. He was a minor celebrity, walking the floor of the convention center, networking, shaking hands, drinking at the free bars. I was just there. I felt like a piece of luggage he had to drag around. I wasn't a tech wife. I wasn't an innovator. I was just Captain Rogers, the woman who didn't fit, standing in the corner of loud parties. That night, we were in the hotel room he had expensed. Corbin was passed out on the bed, fully clothed, snoring and reeking of expensive whiskey. I went into the bathroom. I looked at myself in the harsh, bright light of the vanity mirror. I looked old. I had dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. My skin was dull, my hair was thin. And then, I saw it. I saw Sergeant Miller's face again, reflected in that mirror. I saw that look of pity. I had given up my career. I was working 3 jobs. I was exhausted. I was old, and my identity had been so thoroughly erased that a man who used to respect me pitied me. I realized I had bet everything. My career, my body, my youth, my honor. I had bet it all on Corbin. A cold, sharp, terrifying fear shot through me. It was worse than the exhaustion, worse than the pity. What if he was a bad bet? That cold, sharp fear in the hotel bathroom was something I recognized. It was the same adrenaline spike I'd felt during high-stakes training exercises, the moment before a simulated ambush, the moment you realize the plan has failed and you are exposed. And in the military, when you're exposed, you don't panic. You act. The next morning, Corbin was still dead to the world, buried under the hotel pillows, snoring off the whiskey. The sun was barely up. I was showered, dressed, and my mind was a steel trap. The humiliation from Sergeant Miller, the pity, the fear, it all coalesced into a single, clear objective. I needed a contingency plan. I sat on the hotel balcony, the cool Austin morning air doing nothing to calm the tremor in my hands. I opened my laptop. I wasn't just a wife. I wasn't a rideshare driver. I was Captain Heidi Rogers, U.S. Army Logistics. And I had access to one of the most powerful resources on the planet, the Veteran Network. I didn't search for divorce lawyer. This wasn't about divorce. This was about assets. I searched for Austin's top corporate litigators, veteran. One name dominated the results, Marilyn Chin. The reviews were terrifying. A shark. Relentless. Doesn't stop until she wins. And then, the bio. Marilyn Chin served 12 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, retiring as a major from the JAG Corps. A Marine. Perfect. I called her office. I explained to a very skeptical paralegal that I was an active duty Army captain and I needed to speak to Ms. Chin on an urgent, personal matter. Tell her it's a veteran-to-veteran consult, I said, using the words I knew would work. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the most expensive-looking office I had ever seen, overlooking the state capitol. Marilyn Chin was nothing like her shark-like photos. She was small, impeccably dressed, and had an aura of absolute, terrifying calm. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Captain Rogers," she said, her voice quiet, "you have 30 minutes. Talk." I laid it all out. The refusal of my deployment, the desk job, the 3 jobs, the 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. days, the protein bar dinners, the rideshare humiliation, the our empire manipulation. She listened without a single flicker of emotion, her hands steepled on her desk. When I finished, I was breathing hard, ashamed. I expected her to lecture me. Instead, she nodded slowly. "I understand discipline, Captain," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "And I understand how this civilian world, how it eats people like us alive. We are trained for loyalty, for honor. They are not." She leaned forward. "Let me be clear. You are 100% funding a high-risk startup in which you have zero equity. That is not a marriage, Captain. That is catastrophic financial stupidity. We will fix it." "He won't sign a postnup," I said, my voice shaking. "He'd see it as a betrayal." Marilyn almost smiled. "A postnup? God, no. A postnup is about divorce. A postnup implies you expect it to fail." She tapped her pen on a legal pad. "You are not a worried wife. You are a founding partner. You are the lead investor. What you are owed is an alimony, it's equity. Sweat equity." That word. Sweat equity. The term Corbin used so loosely was now a legal weapon. "What you need," she continued, "is a business agreement. A simple, clear-cut document that outlines your role as a co-founder and your capital contribution." This was my campaign. Marilyn was my strategist. "He's at SXSW, I said. "He's drinking, he's networking, he's..." "Arrogant," she finished. "Perfect. He's distractible." "We will draft this today. It will not mention divorce. It will be dry, boring, and full of corporate language. It will state, in no uncertain terms, that in recognition of your past and ongoing financial contributions and your strategic logistical support..." "I get 49%, I said. "You get 49%, she confirmed. "It will be the truth, and you will get him to sign it." That night, I executed the plan. I returned to the hotel room. The document, printed and nestled in a crisp, professional folder, felt like a bomb in my handbag. My heart was a drum against my ribs. Corbin stumbled in around 10 p.m., drunk, happy, and smelling of success. "Heidi, baby!" he yelled, grabbing me and spinning me around. "I killed it. I absolutely killed it. The VC guys, they're practically begging to invest. We're going to be rich, Heidi. Rich." He was on top of the world. He was invincible. And he was distracted. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open the folder. That's amazing, Corbin," I said, my voice sounding thin. "That's perfect, actually, because..." "Speaking of investors..." He was barely listening, already pouring another drink from the minibar. "One of the new investors' lawyers," I said, reciting the lie Marilyn and I had rehearsed, "sent over some procedural papers. Something about formalizing the corporate structure. They need your signature. I held my breath. He didn't even look up. Ugh, lawyers, right? Always killing the buzz. He grabbed the folder from me, flipped impatiently to the last page, and scrawled his name across the signature line. He didn't read a single word. There, he said, tossing the folder on the bed. He raised his glass. To us, baby. To our empire. To us, I whispered, my stomach churning. The moment he stepped into the bathroom to shower, I moved. My military training kicked in. I snatched the document. I checked the signature. It was legal. I slid the folder into a hidden compartment in my laptop bag, zipped it shut, and shoved the bag deep into the hotel closet. The all clear. The objective was complete. I should have felt relief. I should have felt smart. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the most profound, crushing wave of guilt I have ever experienced in my life. I was a U.S. Army captain. My entire identity was built on a code of honor, loyalty, integrity. And I had just lied. I had deceived the man I loved. I had used his trust, his arrogance, and his drunkenness against him. I felt dirty. I went into the bathroom, turned on the shower to cover the sound, and I sat on the cold tile floor and cried. I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who believed in honor, the one who saw the best in people. I told myself it was just a contingency plan, a piece of paper I would never use. I promised myself that as soon as Corbin's company took off, as soon as our empire was real and we were safe, I would take that piece of paper to a shredder. I would tear it into 1,000 pieces. I hoped to God I would never, ever need to use it. That secret document sat in my bank's safe deposit box, untouched, for all those years. I let myself feel guilty about it for a while, and then I just forgot. The grind was too intense. The 5 a.m. alarms, the 2 a.m. bedtimes, the endless spreadsheets, and the weekend rideshare shifts all blurred into one 7-year-long day. Then, in the 7th year, the text message came. I was at my desk in the Fort Hood basement, auditing a file, when my phone buzzed. It was from Corbin. We got it, $8 million. We're in. I stared at the screen. I didn't understand. I read it again. $8 million. I stood up from my chair, my legs shaking. I walked to the women's restroom, locked myself in a stall, and I sat down. And I cried. I cried for 7 years of exhaustion. I cried from a place of such profound, bone-deep relief that I thought I might collapse. Finally, I whispered to the empty stall. It's over. I can rest. I drove home that day in a daze. I wasn't a rideshare driver. I wasn't a freelance accountant. I was the co-founder of an $8 million company. I was going to quit my desk job. I was going to sleep for a week. When I got home, I found Corbin pacing in the living room, a bottle of champagne in his hand. We did it, he shouted, popping the cork. We did it, I cried, hugging him. We can finally buy a house, a real house. Corbin's smile tightened. He pulled back, his energy shifting. Heidi, don't be naive, he said, his voice suddenly businesslike. This isn't a lottery ticket. This is fuel. Every single penny has to be reinvested back into the company. We have to scale. Now is when the real work starts. I was confused. But, Corbin, I'm so tired. I just want to... Stop. I want to quit the ride-sharing. I want to quit the desk job. He looked at me, not like a wife, but like a confused employee. Why would you do that? He said, genuinely baffled. We're not taking salaries yet. The investors want to see us lean. Don't you get it? Every penny has to be reinvested. You still have your army salary, right? That's perfect. That keeps us stable. The blood drained from my face, the finish line I thought I had crossed. It wasn't a finish line. It was just a mirage. Nothing had changed. Except, everything was about to change. Restock Solutions exploded. Within a month, we moved out of our cramped apartment and into... Well, he moved into a lavish, gleaming glass office in the new Frostbank Tower downtown. Corbin was now Corbin Reynolds, CEO. He hired a CFO. He hired a sales team. And he hired an executive assistant. Her name was Rebecca Morgan. And the first thing I learned about her, because he mentioned it constantly, was that she was a Stanford graduate. I met her at the official office launch party. I had taken a half day off from Fort Hood, and I showed up in what I thought was a nice, simple black dress. The office was packed with Austin's tech elite, men in expensive, custom-made shirts, and women who looked like tech bloggers. And in the middle of it all was Rebecca. She was young, probably 24, and wore a sharp, tailored white suit. She was running the entire event, clipboard in hand, laughing easily with the investors. She was the very picture of the successful Silicon Valley-style woman that Mia had always wanted for Corbin. Corbin finally saw me, waved me over. "Rebecca, come meet my wife, Heidi." Rebecca turned, and her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan, from my simple dress to my sensible shoes. It was a look that took 2 seconds and made me feel worthless. "Oh," she said, her smile bright and plastic. "Hi, Heidi. It's so nice to finally meet you. Corbin rarely talks about his personal life. It's just work, 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 you know." She leaned in, as if sharing a secret. "Can I get you something? A water? A white wine?" She was treating me like a lost guest, like I was someone's plus one, not the woman who had funded the very computer this company was built on. I tried to find my footing. I saw the CFO standing nearby. "I was just looking at the new warehouse schematics," I said, trying to join the world I'd helped build. "I have a few ideas on optimizing the pick-and-pack routes based on my logistics training." The CFO, a man Corbin had hired last week, actually chuckled. "Thanks, Captain," he said, patting my arm in a way that made my skin crawl. "I think we've got it covered. This is tech, not an army warehouse." I spent the rest of the party in the corner, holding the glass of water she'd gotten me, but the party was just the first cut. The second was deeper. Mia, my mother-in-law, was ecstatic about the $8 million. A week after the party, she decided to throw a celebratory dinner for the core team. I was at home, assuming Corbin was at a late meeting, his new normal. I was eating leftover something out of a container, scrolling through Instagram, just waiting for the night to end. And then, I saw it. A photo posted by Mia Reynolds. It was a group shot. They were all sitting at a long formal table. I recognized the wood-paneled background immediately. The Austin Club. The exclusive private club that my salary could never afford. And in the photo, there was Corbin, at the head of the table. There was Mia, raising a glass. There were the new, important investors. And right next to Corbin, smiling brightly, was Rebecca. I looked at the caption. My hands were shaking. Mia had written, "Celebrating the future of Restock Solutions with the real Restock Solutions family. So proud of my son and his incredible team." I wasn't the core team. I wasn't even family. I wasn't even invited. That was the moment I should have known. That was the moment I should have called Marilyn Chin. But I was still that loyal soldier. I was still that hopeful wife. I told myself I was overreacting. The final blow came a week later. The new Restock Solutions website launched. It was beautiful, sleek, fast, professional. Corbin sent me the link, proud. I clicked on the tab that said, About Us. There was a long, inspiring, beautifully written story. It was the myth of Corbin Reynolds. It told the story of a lone, brilliant genius, a man who, from his garage, with nothing but grit and a brilliant idea, built a multi-million-dollar empire from scratch. It talked about his vision, his struggle, his sacrifice. I read every word. And then I read it again. I searched for my name, nothing. I searched for the word partner, nothing. I searched for the $3,000 laptop, the 7 years of 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. days, the freelance accounting, the rideshare shifts, the chicken piccata, the thousands and thousands of dollars from my army salary that I had poured into his dream. Nothing. It wasn't just that I was uninvited, it was that I didn't exist. I had been, in the most final, public, and official way, erased. Have you ever been made to feel invisible? Have you ever watched someone else get the credit for your hard work? If you are on Team Heidi and you believe her 7 years of sweat equity matters, hit that like button. And comment the single word, erased, below if you know how painful this is. I stared at the screen, at the smiling professional photo of the visionary Corbin Reynolds. I was a ghost. I was a ghost in the very machine I'd paid for with my life. Being erased from the website, it turned me into a ghost in my own home. I was living with a man who had publicly declared I didn't exist, and now that I was invisible, I started to see things. Corbin was home later than ever. His meetings now ran past midnight. He started sleeping in the guest room, claiming he didn't want to wake me with his late-night calls. He bought new clothes, expensive shirts I'd never seen. And he came home smelling of a strange perfume. It was a heavy, floral, expensive scent. Not my style at all. And then there was his phone. The phone that used to be tossed on the kitchen counter was now his closest ally. It never left his pocket. If he showered, it was on the bathroom counter. If he slept, it was on the nightstand, face down. Always face down. I was living in a psychological thriller, watching for clues, my stomach in a constant cold knot. The suspicion was making me sick. But the truth was so much worse. It was a Tuesday. 3 a.m. Corbin had come home late and passed out, not in the guest room, but on the living room couch. He was still in his expensive jeans. I walked out to get a glass of water, and I saw it. His phone wasn't on him. It was on the coffee table, face up. And as I stood there, in the dark, the screen lit up. A text notification. From Rebecca S. My heart stopped. It just stopped. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The preview on the screen read, "When are you dumping the old army wife? I'm tired of hiding." I couldn't feel my hands. I picked up the phone. His thumbprint was his birthday. I opened it. The message continued. "I'm tired of hiding, Corbin. She's irrelevant. You said it yourself." My vision blurred. I scrolled up. I scrolled and I scrolled and I scrolled. It wasn't weeks. It was months. Months of them in hotels. Months of them laughing about me. Photos. Inside jokes. Rebecca. Does she still think she's a co-founder? That's so sad. Corbin. It's complicated, babe. She's delicate. Rebecca. I'm not delicate. I'm just bored. Handle it. And then I saw the message that broke me. The one that shattered the last microscopic piece of my soul. Corbin's reply to her, "Soon. I just have to move the last of the money. She served her purpose." She served her purpose. Purpose? I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a partner. I was a purpose. I was a bridge he'd built with my money and my body and my 7 years of sweat, and now that he was safely on the other side, he was ready to burn me. The nausea I felt was acidic. I dropped the phone on the couch as if it were on fire. The woman who felt that pain. She wanted to crawl into a hole and die. But the captain, the intel officer, she was awake. The next day, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I went to my desk at Fort Hood, and from that basement, I started to dig. It's amazing what you can find when you have the discipline of an intel officer and the rage of a woman scorned. He wasn't just cheating, he was preparing. He was arrogant. He used his own name. I found the public records. He had leased a new private apartment, not just any apartment, a penthouse, at The Independent, that insane Jenga-looking luxury tower in downtown Austin. I looked at the dates. He'd been paying the $15,000 a month rent for 3 months, all while I was still driving ride shares and worrying about our grocery bills. He had already moved his money. He had already built his new life. I was just the last piece of trash to be taken out. I went home that night. I found him in the kitchen, casually drinking a craft beer, looking at his new, glorious life on his laptop. I didn't speak. I just walked up to him, and, with a flick of my wrist, I slapped him across the face. The sound was sharp. A loud pop that echoed in the silence of the apartment we'd shared. My hand stung, vibrating with 7 years of rage. Corbin just stood there. He didn't yell. He didn't even look surprised. He slowly raised a hand to his cheek, where a red print was already forming. He looked at me, and his eyes were completely, terrifyingly cold. He wasn't the man I'd met. He wasn't even the man on the website. He was a stranger. "You're becoming boring, Heidi," he said, his voice flat. "So predictable." "The independent, Corbin?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "A penthouse?" He actually sighed, like I was the inconvenience. "So you know," he said. He shut his laptop. "Good. That makes this easier." We're done," he said. "Look at you, Heidi. You're just stuck. You're always talking about honor and discipline and duty. You're an army mule. You don't fit in my world anymore." He motioned toward his new, shiny life. "Rebecca? She gets it. She's fast. She understands me. You're just baggage." "Baggage?" I screamed. "I paid for all of this." "You invested," he corrected me, his voice like ice. "And it was a good investment. But your term is over. We're done." He walked past me, went into the guest room, and started packing a bag. He moved into the Independent that night. The next 2 weeks were a blur of gray. The silence in the apartment was a living thing. I went to work. I came home. I stared at the wall. I was numb. I was waiting. Then, it happened. I was at my desk in the basement. My colleagues, other soldiers, were all around me, doing their own pointless work. A man in a cheap-looking suit walked into the office. He looked out of place. "I'm looking for Captain Heidi Rogers," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My head snapped up. My colleagues turned. They were all staring. I raised my hand, my body cold. "I'm Captain Rogers." He walked over to my desk. He didn't smile. He pulled a thick envelope of papers from his satchel. "You've been served," he said, dropping the papers on my desk. In front of everyone, in front of my peers, my colleagues, my subordinates. In the one place I had any shred of dignity left. He turned and walked out. The office was silent. I could feel 20 pairs of eyes on me. I grabbed the envelope, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I stood up, walked to the women's restroom on legs made of jelly, and locked myself in the stall. Divorce papers. I ripped them open. My eyes scanned the legal jargon. And then I saw it. The settlement. He was offering... I had to read it 3 times. I thought it was a typo. $50,000. $50,000. It wasn't a settlement. It was a tip. It was a pity payment. It was what he paid for 3 months of rent at his new penthouse. It was his final valuation of my 7 years, my 3 jobs, my honor, my body, my entire life. $50,000. The nausea I'd felt in the living room came roaring back. I leaned over the toilet and I dry heaved. I retched and gagged, but nothing came up. Because there was nothing left. I was empty. I don't know how I got home from Fort Hood that day. I don't remember the drive. I don't remember walking into my apartment. I spent the next 3 days in what I can only describe as a gray fog. The dark night of the soul isn't a poetic expression. It's a place. It's a cold, soundproof room, and I was in it. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat. I sat on the couch in the silent, empty apartment, still in my uniform from the day I was served. I stared at the wall. The $50,000 wasn't an insult. It was an execution. It was Corbin's final declaration that my 7 years of life, my career, my body, my purpose, was worth a down payment on a luxury car. Everything I had ever believed in had proven to be a lie. I looked at the awards on my bookshelf. I looked at my Army Commendation Medal. I looked at the Meritorious Service Medal. They meant nothing. I had built my entire life on a code: honor, loyalty, integrity, commitment. And what did it get me? It got me publicly humiliated in front of my soldiers. It got me erased. It got me replaced by a girl from Stanford. It got me a $50,000 pity check. My loyalty wasn't a virtue. It was a fatal flaw. My honor wasn't a strength. It was a weakness that he had exploited from the day he met me. I had sacrificed my entire career for a con artist. I was a fool. A broken, pathetic, empty fool. On the third day of the fog, I finally moved. I was numb. I felt like I was moving underwater. I started to clear out Corbin's things, though he hadn't left much. Just some old clothes, some books. I was on my hands and knees in the bottom of the closet, pulling out old boxes, when my hand brushed against something I hadn't seen in years. It was a stack of books from before Corbin. Back when I had time to read. And on the top of the stack was a book I'd bought ages ago at a shop on South Congress, The Gifts of Imperfection, by Brené Brown. I stared at the name, the famous Austen icon, the woman who had built an empire by talking about shame. I pulled the book out. It felt heavy. I sat back on my heels on the floor of the empty closet, and I opened it. My eyes were so blurry from not sleeping that the words just swam on the page. I flipped a few pages, not really reading. It was just something to do. And then my eyes landed on a sentence. It was a sentence I had apparently underlined in pen all those years ago. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage. I read the line again. Vulnerability is not weakness. A strange, cold clarity cut through the gray fog. My mind raced back. My fatal flaw. My blind loyalty. The moments I was most ashamed of. That first $3,000 for the laptop. The moment I turned down Germany. The 7 years of 3 jobs. The guilt I felt after signing that secret contract. The one I'd buried in a bank vault because I was so ashamed of my deceit. Corbin and his mother and Rebecca. They saw all of that as weakness, as pathetic, as something to be used. I stared at the page, and for the first time, I saw it. It wasn't weakness, it was the proof of my commitment. I wasn't weak for trusting. I was courageous. I was courageous enough to bet on someone. I was courageous enough to sacrifice my own ambitions for a partnership I believed in. My vulnerability, my loyalty, wasn't the joke. He was the joke. He didn't just break a promise. He didn't just cheat. He betrayed the most courageous part of me, and that realization, it didn't make me sad. It didn't make me want to cry. It made me angry. It was a new kind of anger. It wasn't the hot, messy anger that made me slap him. It wasn't the desperate anger I'd felt in the bathroom. It was a cold, quiet, and perfectly focused rage. The fog was gone. The dark night of the soul was over. The captain was back. I closed the book. I stood up. I knew exactly what to do. I walked into the bathroom, washed my face, and pulled my hair back into a tight regulation bun. I put on a clean, pressed civilian shirt and jeans. I grabbed my purse and my car keys. I drove, not aimlessly, but with a destination. I drove to the Chase Bank branch where I'd had an account since I was first stationed at Fort Hood. I walked past the tellers, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. I walked to the back, to the vault. A nice young man helped me. "How are you today, ma'am?" "I'm fine," I said. "I need to access my safe deposit box." He led me into the vault. He used his key. I used mine. He pulled out the long, cold metal box and set it on the table in the private viewing room. He closed the door. I sat down. I lifted the lid. And there it was. It wasn't buried. It was right on top. The crisp, clean folder Marilyn Chin had given me 7 years ago. I pulled it out. I opened it. The business agreement. I looked at the clause Marilyn had drafted. The one that defined my 7 years of ride-sharing, accounting, and Army salary as sweat equity. I looked at the last page. Corbin's sloppy, arrogant signature next to the line, 49%. When I'd last held this paper, in that hotel room, I'd felt sick with guilt. I'd seen it as a betrayal of my honor. But as I sat there in the cold, quiet bank vault, I realized the truth. This paper wasn't the lie. This paper was the truth. This was the only truth left. This wasn't deceit. This was the receipt. This was the proof of my courage. This was the weapon I had forged from my own vulnerability. I folded the document, slid it into my purse, and walked out of the bank, my head held high. I drove back to the empty apartment. The $50,000 divorce papers were still on the kitchen counter, right where I'd left them. I picked them up. I picked up my phone. I dialed. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, sharp, calm, and no nonsense. Marilyn Chin speaking. I took a deep breath. The last bit of the old Heidi fell away. Marilyn, this is Captain Heidi Rogers. There was a pause, a beat of recognition. Captain, she said, her voice warming just a degree. It's been a long time. I was wondering if I'd ever hear from you. I'm sorry it took so long, ma'am, I said. I'm holding a $50,000 settlement offer in my hand. Marilyn actually laughed. A short, sharp, ha! Is that so? She said. Yes, ma'am. He thinks I'm just a supportive wife. He thinks I've served my purpose. Marilyn's voice went cold, just like mine. Then I assume this is not a social call. No, ma'am, I said, looking at the divorce papers. It's time to launch the counteroffensive. I could hear her smile through the phone. It's time, I said, to show them what happens when a logistics officer plans for war. The day of the hearing, I woke up before my 5 a.m. alarm. I didn't need it. I was already awake. That cold, focused rage from my conversation with Marilyn had been simmering for weeks. Today was the day. I didn't look at my old, tired desk job uniform. I went to the very back of my closet, to the garment bag I hadn't touched in years. I put on my Class A Army service uniform. The dark blue jacket, the light blue trousers, the polished brass. I pinned on my ribbons, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Commendation Medals. I fixed my captain's bars onto the shoulders. I looked in the mirror. This uniform wasn't a costume, as Corbin's lawyer had implied in his filings. It wasn't pitiable. It was my armor. It was me. I drove to the Travis County Courthouse in silence. Marilyn Chin was waiting for me on the front steps, holding a sleek leather briefcase. She wasn't in uniform, but she wore a dark, severe suit that had the same effect. She looked at me, gave a single, sharp nod, and we walked in. The courtroom was small, sterile, and cold. Corbin was already there. He was wearing an obnoxiously expensive Italian suit, looking like the cover of a tech magazine. Beside him sat Rebecca Morgan, looking young, sharp, and nervous. And in the front row, like a queen holding court, was Mia Reynolds, her face a mask of bored superiority. And then there was their lawyer, Lawrence Harrington. He was exactly what you'd expect. $5,000 suit, a gold watch, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marilyn and I sat at our small table. We were outgunned and outnumbered. It didn't matter. We had the truth. The morning was a blur of legal arguments. Harrington was a shark. He was smooth, charming the judge, painting a picture of Corbin as a lone visionary. Your Honor, Harrington said, his voice dripping with false sincerity, my client, Corbin Reynolds, is Restock Solutions. He is a visionary, a genius. He took an idea and, with his own sweat and his own risk, built an $8 million company from nothing. He then turned, slowly, to look at me. He pointed. And what of Captain Rogers? A fine soldier, I'm sure. But what does a soldier know of risk? What does a salaried government employee know about the terrifying sleepless nights of the private sector? She had a pension. She had health care. She had a guaranteed paycheck. He walked towards me, his voice low and condescending. Her entire career is based on following orders. We are here to talk about building a business, Your Honor. Not following a manual. Captain Rogers was a supportive wife, but a partner, a founder. The claim is, frankly, insulting to the real entrepreneurs of this city. My blood was boiling. I felt my hands clench into fists under the table. I felt the heat rise in my face. This was the attack from my nightmare. He was using my service as an insult. I looked at Mia. She was nodding, a smug little smile on her lips. This was their story, the narrative they had built. I was just the dumb, loyal, military mule. Then it was Corbin's turn to testify. He took the stand, swore the oath, and transformed. He became the brilliant, wounded, misunderstood genius. Mr. Reynolds, Harrington asked, Did your wife, Captain Rogers, ever contribute to the strategy of restock solutions? Corbin let out a small, sad-sounding sigh. I love Heidi, he said, actually managing to look sorrowful. I always will. But no. She just wouldn't understand. It's a very complex world, the technology, the financial models. So she had no business savvy, no strategic input. No, Corbin said, shaking his head. She's a soldier. She's a logistics officer. She's not an entrepreneur. I mean, her contribution was her salary. And I was grateful for that. But that was it. She never had a real job in the business world. He looked at me, his eyes full of fake pity. It was 100% my company, my idea, my work. I built it. I looked at him. The man I had driven for, the man I had turned down Germany for. He was lying, under oath, without a single flicker of hesitation. I felt Marilyn's hand on my arm, a silent, stay calm. The court took a brief recess. When we returned, Harrington rested his case, looking impossibly proud of himself. Does the respondent have any witnesses? The judge asked. Just one, Your Honor, Marilyn Chin said, standing up. I'd like to call Mr. Corbin Reynolds back to the stand for cross-examination. Harrington's smile faltered for a second. Corbin looked annoyed, but he swaggered back to the witness box. Marilyn was a different creature from Harrington. He was a performer. She was a sniper. She approached the box, her hands clasped behind her back. Mr. Reynolds, you just testified, under oath, that Captain Rogers had absolutely no strategic input into restock solutions. Is that correct? That's correct, Corbin said, confident. She wouldn't know where to begin. You also testified that it was 100% your company and 100% your idea, correct? Yes, absolutely. And that her only contribution was her salary as a supportive wife? Yes. Marilyn smiled. It was a thin, dangerous smile, the smile of a Marine who has the enemy in her sights. Then, Mr. Reynolds, she said, her voice suddenly cutting through the room, perhaps you can explain this document to the court. She turned to me. Captain. I stood up. I picked up my own, identical leather briefcase. I clicked it open. I removed a single, bound document. Marilyn took it from me, walked to the judge, and handed her a copy. For the court. She handed a copy to a suddenly very pale Lawrence Harrington, and she placed the final copy in front of Corbin Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, Marilyn said, can you identify this document? Corbin stared at it. His arrogance was gone. His face was white. I don't, he stammered. Allow me to help, Marilyn said. This, Your Honor, is a business agreement, not a prenup, not a postnup, a business agreement drafted 7 years ago in Austin, Texas. The room was dead silent. I could hear Harrington shuffling papers. His confidence completely evaporated. This agreement, Marilyn continued, outlines in detail the specific financial contributions of Captain Heidi Rogers. But more importantly, Your Honor, it defines her 7 years of support as sweat equity for her specific contributions to the company's logistical strategy. She let the words hang in the air. And Mr. Reynolds, she said, turning to him, is that your signature on the final page? Corbin was staring at his own name. He was visibly shaking. Is it or is it not your signature, sir? Yes, but... And can you please read for the court the clause right above your signature, the one regarding equity distribution? Corbin just stared, mute. He seems to have trouble reading it, Your Honor, Marilyn said. I'll read it for him. She turned to the gallery, to Mia, to Rebecca. It reads, in consideration of the aforementioned financial and strategic contributions, Heidi Rogers is hereby granted a 49% stake in Restock Solutions. The sound Mia Reynolds made was a strangled gasp. Harrington jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is an ambush. This document it's fraudulent. It's notarized, Mr. Harrington, Marilyn said calmly, and we have the email logs from that night to prove receipt. I was drunk, Corbin suddenly yelled from the stand. She tricked me. I was drunk at SXSW. I didn't know what I was signing. Marilyn Chin just looked at him. She let his pathetic excuse echo in the silent, stunned courtroom. Then she turned back to the judge. Your Honor, she said, the respondent rests. Corbin's pathetic excuse, I was drunk, hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. Lawrence Harrington, his face pale and slick with sweat, was already trying to motion for a mistrial, an appeal, anything. But it was too late. The bomb had gone off. Judge Eleanor Mackenzie, the woman they had tried to charm, looked down at Corbin from the bench. Her face was pure granite. She didn't even give Harrington the courtesy of a full response. She just raised her hand. That is enough, Mr. Harrington. I have heard the testimony. I have reviewed the evidence presented by both sides. This court will recess for 1 hour, after which I will deliver my judgment. She struck the gavel, and the room exploded. Corbin was still sitting in the witness box, looking like a ghost. Rebecca had run out of the courtroom, pushing past reporters. And Mia Reynolds. She was screaming at Harrington, her face a mask of purple rage. Captain, Marilyn said, her voice calm in the chaos. Let's get some air. We walked out to a private hallway. The adrenaline from the showdown was fading, and my legs suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. I leaned against the wall, the exhaustion of 7 years hitting me all at once. You did it, Captain, Marilyn said, allowing herself a small, satisfied smile. You held the line. You did it, Marilyn, I said. My voice was hoarse. We did, she corrected. Now stay sharp. The battle's won, but we still have to secure the field. An hour later, we were back in our seats. The room was packed. The press had smelled blood. Judge Mackenzie entered. The room fell silent. She put on her glasses and looked directly at Corbin. Mr. Reynolds, she began, this court finds your testimony to be inconsistent, evasive, and in several key areas, utterly lacking in credibility. She then turned to the document. The defense's claim that this business agreement is fraudulent or invalid due to intoxication is, to put it mildly, absurd. This is a clear, concise, and notarized contract between two business partners. It is valid. It is binding. I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. Then the judge did something I didn't expect. She took off her glasses and looked at me. Her expression was no longer just judicial. It was something human. Furthermore, she said, her voice sharp, this court finds the defendant's attempts to diminish and degrade the service and sacrifice of a United States Army officer to be reprehensible. Harrington sank a little lower in his chair. Mia Reynolds looked like she had been slapped. The plaintiff's military service, the judge continued, and the values of honor and commitment she clearly upholds are not weaknesses. In this case, they were the very foundation of the sweat equity that built this company. She put her glasses back on. The judgment is final. This court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Heidi Rogers. She is hereby affirmed as the legal owner of 49% of Restock Solutions, effective immediately. The defendant's offer of $50,000 is dismissed with the contempt it deserves. This court is adjourned. The gavel cracked. It was done. For a moment, I couldn't move. It was over. The word reprehensible echoed in my head. Vindication. Marilyn grabbed my arm. Here comes the hard part, Captain. The press. The doors of the courthouse flew open, and it was a feeding frenzy. Microphones and cameras were shoved in our faces. Captain Rogers, how does it feel? Corbin, did you lie under oath? Mr. Harrington, will you appeal? I saw Corbin and Rebecca, surrounded by their own legal team, practically running down a side hallway, shoving their way to an elevator. They looked terrified. A reporter shoved a mic in my face. Captain Rogers, you've been silent for 7 years. What do you have to say? Marilyn nodded at me. Your stage, Captain. I looked at the cameras. I was still in my uniform. I was still a captain in the United States Army. I stood up straight, my shoulders back. I stepped up to the microphones. For the past 7 years, I said, my voice clear and strong, I have lived by the code I was taught in the Army: integrity, honor, and commitment. I paused, letting the words sink in. This case was not just about money, it was about those principles. This judgment confirms that any partnership, whether in business or in life, must be built on that foundation. I am grateful to the court for recognizing the truth. "What's next for you and Restock Solutions?" another reporter shouted. "I expect Restock Solutions," I said, looking directly into the main camera, "to begin demonstrating those values in its future operations." It was a warning, and then I saw her. Pushing through the reporters like a wild animal, her face twisted in a snarl. "You!" Mia Reynolds shrieked, lunging towards me. "You bitch!" The cameras all swung to her. Security guards immediately moved in, but she got close enough to spit her venom. "You ruined him! You ruined my son! You gold-digging bitch!" The old Heidi would have shrunk. The old Heidi would have been intimidated, ashamed, and desperate for her approval. That Heidi was gone. I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, my face as calm and cold as the judge's. "You're wrong, Mia," I said, my voice low and cutting. "You did this. You did this when you taught your son that loyalty had no value. You did this when you taught him that partnership was something to be discarded." She was speechless, her mouth open. "I won today because of the values I learned. He lost because of the values you taught." I stared her down for one more second. Then I gave my final order. "Now, get out of my way." The security guards finally grabbed her arms. She was still screaming as they pulled her back. Marilyn and I walked, not ran, through the crowd. We got into the elevator and the doors slid shut, sealing off the noise. It was just me and her. I finally sagged against the wall, the adrenaline gone, leaving only exhaustion. "You were magnificent, Captain," she said. "Now what?" I whispered. "Now," Marilyn said, pressing the button for the lobby, "we negotiate the terms of their surrender." The buyout negotiation was scheduled for the next day in Marilyn's high-rise office. Corbin showed up. He looked terrible. No Italian suit, no genius aura. He just looked small. He sat down across from me and Marilyn. He tried one last time. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Heidi, please. We were us. Don't do this. We can fix this. Think about everything we had." Before I could even speak, Marilyn Chin cut him off. She slid a single piece of paper across the table. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice like ice. "Captain Rogers is not here to discuss us. She's here to discuss the buyout of her 49% stake. This is the number." Corbin looked down at the paper. His eyes went wide. The number was astronomical. It was 49% of the full $8 million valuation, plus damages, plus interest. This is impossible," he whispered. "This will ruin me. This will liquidate everything." I looked at him, the man I had loved, the man I had sacrificed my career for, the man who had called me old and useless. I felt nothing. No anger, no love, no pity, just empty. "This is not a negotiation, Corbin," I said, my first and only words to him. "This is the price. You have 48 hours to have your new investors wire the funds, or we start proceedings to liquidate the company's assets. We are done." He stared at me, finally understanding. The supportive wife was gone. The captain was giving an order. He didn't have a choice. He had been so desperate to prove I wasn't a partner. And in the end, by proving I was a partner, he had lost everything. It took 6 months for the wire transfers to complete and the last legal document to be signed. The buyout was finalized. Corbin Reynolds and his company, Restock Solutions, were officially out of my life. The day the final transfer hit my account, I didn't feel joy, or triumph, or anger. I just felt that same emptiness. The war was over, the field was cleared, and I was alone in the silence. I finished my remaining time at Fort Hood, signing the last of my discharge papers. I was given an honorable discharge for my years of service. I packed up my small apartment. I looked at the $50,000 divorce papers, the ones that had started all this, still pinned to my corkboard. I took them down, and I left them in the trash. I took the money that was legally and morally mine, and I left Fort Hood and the Army behind. I didn't know who I was without the uniform. I didn't know who I was without Corbin. I was just Heidi. It was terrifying, and it was the beginning. 1 year later, I'm standing in an office, but it's not a gray cinder block room at Fort Hood. This office has floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Austin skyline. The walls are a calm, soft white. The furniture is minimalist and modern. And on the glass door, in simple, elegant lettering, it reads, Rogers Strategic Solutions. My office. My company. I'm standing at a whiteboard, sketching out a supply chain. You're bottlenecking here, I say, circling a point. Your cost per unit is too high because you're ordering beans from 3 different suppliers. You need to consolidate. Across from me, a young man in his 20s, wearing a veteran-owned t-shirt, is scribbling notes. Wow, ma'am. Heidi. Wow, I never saw that. It's just logistics, I say, smiling. It's what I do. You've got a great product. This coffee's amazing. Let me help you build the empire it deserves. He's a young Marine vet trying to build a coffee company from the ground up. He reminds me of the good parts of the dream, the passion, the vision. He's my 3rd client this month, all veteran-owned startups. I'm not just a logistics officer anymore. I'm a consultant. I'm a mentor. I am, for the first time in my life, completely, fully, and peacefully in command. My assistant buzzes in. Heidi, your copy of Forbes is here. I thank her, and she places the magazine on my desk. I had forgotten it was coming out this week. I sit down in my leather chair, the one I paid for, and I look at the cover. It's their annual Veterans in Business issue. I flip to page 54. And there I am. It's a picture of me, not in uniform, but in a sharp blue blazer, standing right here in this office. The headline reads, The Captain's Strategy: How Heidi Rogers Turned Sweat Equity into a New Empire. The article tells my story. It doesn't paint me as a victim. It doesn't mention the affairs or the lies. It paints me as a strategist. It talks about the 7-year plan. It talks about the 49% agreement. It talks about how I identified a flaw, created a contingency plan, and executed it. It calls me one of the sharpest new minds in venture strategy. I read the words, and I finally accept them. It wasn't weakness, it wasn't blind loyalty, it was courage. And it was, in the end, a hell of a strategy. My sacrifice wasn't a mistake, it was just a much, much longer seed investment than I had planned on. But the new office, the Forbes article, it still felt like something was missing. The why. I knew what I had to do. I took a portion of the settlement, a large portion, and I made a call. A few weeks later, I'm driving back to Fort Hood. For the first time, I'm not driving a rideshare. I'm in my new car and I pass through the main gate, not as a soldier, but as a guest. I'm escorted to a conference room. Waiting for me is a board of officers, and at the head of the table is Colonel Thompson, my old mentor, the one who had been so disappointed when I turned down Germany. He stands up. He looks older, but his eyes are the same. He doesn't salute. He walks over and extends his hand. Heidi, he says, using my first name for the first time ever. Welcome back. Sir, I say, shaking his hand. I read the article in Forbes, he says, with a small, proud smile. It seems you were planning a different kind of war all along. Something like that, sir. I sit down and I make my pitch. Colonel, I say, when I was here, I saw a gap. I saw families, spouses. I saw people fall through the cracks. I saw how a simple financial crisis, a car breaking down, a medical bill, could destroy a family while their soldier was deployed. I slide a folder across the table. I want to establish a new fund. I'm pledging the seed money. It's called the Military Spouse Support Fund. It's a rapid disbursement fund, no red tape, to help military spouses who are in financial distress, to help them pay for that car repair, or that laptop for school, or that plane ticket to go home. I look him in the eyes. So no one has to make a desperate choice. So no one feels the kind of financial desperation that I did. The room is silent. Colonel Thompson looks at the proposal. He looks at the check. He closes the folder and stands up. He comes over, puts his hand on my shoulder. "Welcome home, Rogers," he says, his voice thick. "You were always one of our best." And that's the moment it all heals. The career killer desk job, the shame, the disappointment. It's gone. I've turned my pain into a purpose. My wound has become my legacy. I'm back in my office in Austin a week later. I'm finishing the logistics plan for the coffee company. My assistant knocks. "Heidi, a delivery for you." She brings in a small bouquet of flowers. Not extravagant, not roses, just simple, white flowers. "Who are they from?" I ask. "The card just has a C on it," she says. My blood doesn't run cold. My heart doesn't hammer. It doesn't do anything. She places them on my desk. I look at them. I pick up the small white card. It's written in his familiar, arrogant handwriting. "Congratulations. You deserve it." C. I hold the card. I think about the man who wrote it, the man I drove rideshare for, the man who called me useless, the man who tried to buy my life for $50,000. I don't feel anger. I don't feel hate. I don't feel sadness. I don't even feel forgiveness. I feel nothing. I am completely, totally, and absolutely empty of him. He's just a name from a previous life, a file from a closed case. I turn in my chair. I hold the small card over the shredder. I let it go. I listen to the quiet, mechanical zzz as the machine does its work, turning his final words into meaningless strips of paper. I turn back to my computer. I pull up the logistics chart for the coffee company, and a small, real smile touches my lips. I am free, and I am just getting started. Thank you for listening. My story wasn't just about winning in court. It was about finding my worth when everyone tried to erase it. I had to learn to stop looking for validation and build my own dawn. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to be seen, I see you. Please comment "worthy" below if you believe in turning pain into purpose. It means the world to know I'm not alone. And please like this video and subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice. You are not alone.